medical bay of Station Kepler 7 was cold and quiet when Mira Vance opened her eyes for the first time in 17 years. She did not know it then, but she was the most dangerous thing in the universe. The doctors around her bed wore expressions of carefully practiced calm, but their hands trembled as they checked the monitors. One of them, a woman with silver hair and tired eyes, stepped forward and tried to smile. "Hello, Mira. Do you know where you are?" Mira looked at the ceiling. It was white and smooth, broken only by strips of soft light. She could feel something strange inside her chest, like a second heartbeat that did not match the first. Her mouth was dry, and when she tried to speak, no sound came out at first. She swallowed hard and tried again. "I was sleeping," she said. Her voice sounded wrong to her own ears, too deep, too rough. "I was sleeping for a long time." The silver-haired doctor nodded slowly. Her name tag read Dr. Sarah Chen, and she had been working on Project Emergence for 12 years. She had seen many things that would have broken lesser minds, but nothing had prepared her for the girl lying in that bed. "You were in stasis," Dr. Chen explained gently, "since you were born." "Do you remember anything before the sleep?" Mira thought about this question for a long moment. There were shadows in her mind, shapes without names, sounds without meaning. She remembered warmth and darkness and a voice that might have been her mother's. But these memories felt like dreams, fading even as she tried to hold on to them. "No," she said finally. "Nothing." Dr. Chen exchanged a quick glance with the other doctors. They had expected this answer, but it still filled them with a mixture of relief and dread. Relief because Mira did not remember the circumstances of her birth. Dread because those circumstances would have to be explained eventually. On the far side of the station, in a conference room with walls made of reinforced steel and windows that looked out onto the endless darkness of space, a group of military officers was having a very different conversation. Admiral James Corvin stood at the head of the long table, his broad shoulders casting a shadow across the holographic display in front of him. He was a man of 63 years, with a face like weathered stone and eyes that had seen too many battles to count. "The asset is awake," he said, and his voice carried the weight of command. "We have approximately 72 hours before the Confederacy learns about this development. After that, we will have no choice but to act." The officer to his left, a young woman named Commander Lisa Park, leaned forward in her chair. She had been assigned to Project Emergence only 6 months ago, but she had read every file, studied every report. She knew what Mira Vance was, at least on paper. The reality, she suspected, was far worse. "Sir, with respect," Commander Park said carefully, "we still don't know the full extent of her abilities. The tests from 17 years ago were incomplete. We could be dealing with something beyond our control." Admiral Corvin turned to look at her, and there was something in his gaze that made her wish she had kept silent. He was not an unkind man, but he was a practical one, and practicality often wore the face of cruelty. "Everything is beyond our control, Commander," he said quietly. "That's why we need weapons that can tip the balance. Mira Vance is not a person. She is a possibility, and possibilities must be explored." The story of how Mira Vance came to be was not written in any official record. The files that existed were scattered across a dozen secure servers, hidden behind layers of encryption that would take even the most advanced computers centuries to break. But Dr. Chen knew the truth because she had been there at the beginning. It started with a discovery. 20 years before Mira's awakening, a research vessel called the Wanderer found something impossible in the outer reaches of the Perseus Arm. It was a structure, vast beyond comprehension, floating in the void between stars. The structure was not made of any material known to human science. It did not reflect light or emit radiation. It simply existed, a hole in the fabric of reality itself. The crew of the Wanderer spent 3 months studying the structure from a distance. They sent probes that never returned. They took readings that made no sense. And then, against all protocols and common sense, Captain Marcus Cole decided to take a shuttle inside. What he found there changed everything. The interior of the structure was filled with what could only be described as energy, raw and pure, and older than the universe itself. It flowed like water and burned like fire and sang in frequencies that no human ear could hear. Captain Cole spent 4 hours inside the structure before his shuttle systems began to fail. When he emerged, he was carrying something in his hands. It was a sphere, no larger than a human heart, and it glowed with a light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The sphere was warm to the touch and pulsed with a rhythm that matched Captain Cole's own heartbeat. He did not know what it was or what it could do, but he knew with absolute certainty that it was important. The sphere was taken to Station Kepler 7, where the brightest minds in the Terran Alliance spent years trying to understand it. They learned that it was not a machine or a power source, but something far more complex. The sphere was a template, a blueprint for something that had never existed before. It contained instructions written in a language that was not quite mathematics and not quite music. Instructions for creating a new kind of life. Project Emergence was born from that discovery. The scientists of Kepler 7 believed they could use the sphere's template to create a human with abilities beyond anything nature had ever produced. They believed they could build a weapon that would end the war with the Confederacy before it truly began. And so they began their work, playing gods in the cold silence of space. Mira Vance was the result of that work. She was not grown in a tank or assembled from spare parts. She was born, like any human child, from a mother who volunteered for the project and a father whose identity was never recorded. But from the moment of her conception, she was different. The sphere's energy had been woven into her DNA, changing her in ways that even her creators did not fully understand. The first signs appeared within hours of her birth. The lights in the delivery room flickered and died. The monitoring equipment screamed with feedback before going silent, and the doctors who touched her felt something pass through them, a current of pure potential that left their minds forever changed. It was Dr. Chen who made the decision to put Mira in stasis. She had looked into the newborn's eyes and seen something that should not have been there. An awareness, an intelligence that was far too vast for such a small body. The sphere's gift was too much for an infant to contain. If Mira was allowed to grow naturally, she would have burned through her own mind before reaching her first birthday. So they waited. They kept Mira frozen in time while the war raged across the galaxy, and the Confederacy grew stronger with each passing year. They waited until the technology existed to help her control her power. They waited until desperation finally overcame caution. Now, 17 years later, the waiting was over. Mira spent her first week awake learning how to be human. This was more difficult than it sounds because she had never been truly human to begin with. The doctors and therapists who worked with her were patient and kind, but she could see the fear behind their smiles. She could feel their thoughts pressing against the edges of her mind like fingers on glass. She learned that she could read emotions the way other people read words on a page. She learned that she could move objects without touching them. Though this ability was erratic and often painful, she learned that when she felt strong emotions, things around her had a tendency to break. The first incident happened on her 8th day of consciousness. A young nurse named Thomas had been assigned to bring her meals, and over the course of several days, Mira had grown fond of him. He was one of the few people on the station who did not seem afraid of her. He told her jokes and brought her flowers from the hydroponics bay and treated her like a person instead of a problem to be solved. On the 8th day, Thomas did not come. Mira waited in her room, watching the door, feeling a strange tightness in her chest that she would later learn to call worry. Hours passed, and still Thomas did not appear. The tightness grew worse, transforming into something sharper, something that felt like fear, and then she felt it. A flash of pain and terror that cut through her mind like a blade. It was Thomas's pain, Thomas's terror, and it was coming from somewhere deep in the station. Mira did not make a conscious decision to act. One moment she was sitting on her bed, and the next she was running through corridors she had never seen before, guided by the thread of Thomas's emotions. The lights above her flickered as she passed, and the walls groaned under pressure that had no visible source. People shouted and scrambled out of her way, but she did not slow down. She found Thomas in a storage bay on the lower levels. 3 men in civilian clothes had cornered him against a wall of cargo containers. They were asking questions about her abilities, about the security codes to her quarters. Thomas was bleeding from a cut on his forehead and shaking with fear, but he was not talking. The men turned when Mira entered. One of them raised a weapon and fired, but the energy bolt stopped in mid-air, frozen by a force that Mira did not understand but somehow controlled. She looked at the 3 men, and she felt something new rising inside her, something hot and dark and hungry. "You heard him," she said, and her voice echoed strangely. as if many voices were speaking at once. What happened next was over in seconds. The weapon in the first man's hand crumpled like paper. The second man was lifted off his feet and thrown against the far wall with enough force to crack the metal plating. The third man simply fell, clutching his head and screaming, though Mira had not touched him at all. When security finally arrived, they found Thomas sitting against the cargo containers, unharmed, except for his minor injuries. The three men were alive but unconscious, their minds temporarily overloaded by psychic energy they were never meant to experience. And Mira was standing in the center of the bay, tears streaming down her face, apologizing over and over again. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. "I didn't mean to hurt them. I just wanted them to stop." Dr. Chen was the one who came to collect her. She wrapped a blanket around Mira's shoulders and led her back to the medical bay, speaking in soft, soothing tones the entire way. She did not ask questions or make accusations. She simply stayed close and waited for Mira's tears to stop. Later that night, after Mira had been sedated and placed under observation, Dr. Chen met with Admiral Corvin in his private office. The Admiral was standing by the window, watching a patrol of fighters sweep past the station in tight formation. "The three men were Confederacy agents," he said without turning around. "They managed to infiltrate the station 6 weeks ago. We've been tracking them, waiting to see what they would do." Dr. Chen felt a chill run down her spine. "You knew they were here. You let them attack that boy." "I let them reveal themselves," Admiral Corvin corrected calmly. "And in doing so, I learned something valuable. Mira's abilities are even greater than we hoped. She detected the attack from across the station. She neutralized 3 trained operatives without any combat training of her own. She did all of this instinctively, without planning or preparation. She's a child," Dr. Chen said, and there was anger in her voice now. "She's been awake for 8 days, and you're already treating her like a weapon." The Admiral finally turned to face her. His expression was not unkind, but it was firm. "She is a weapon, Dr. Chen. That's what we made her to be. The question now is whether she's a weapon we can use or a weapon that will destroy us. The next few weeks will give us the answer. Far away from Station Kepler 7, across a gulf of empty space that would take months to cross at maximum speed, the Confederacy of Independent Systems was preparing for war. Their capital world of New Geneva was a paradise of gleaming cities and manicured gardens, a testament to what humanity could achieve when freed from the constraints of Earth's dying governments. At least, that was what their propaganda claimed. The truth, as always, was more complicated. Chancellor Elena Cross stood in the war room of her palace, surrounded by generals and advisors and holographic maps of a galaxy in flames. She was a woman of 50 years, with sharp features and eyes the color of winter ice. She had built the Confederacy from a handful of rebel colonies into an empire that spanned 1,000 worlds, and she had done it through a combination of brilliance, charisma, and absolute ruthlessness. "Our agents on Kepler 7 have gone silent," General Marcus Wu reported. Their last transmission indicated they had located the target, but were unable to extract her. Chancellor Cross studied the holographic display in front of her. It showed the position of every known Alliance military asset, updated in real time by a network of spies and sensors that had taken decades to build. "The girl," she said thoughtfully. "Project Emergence. I had hoped the rumors were exaggerated. The intelligence suggests otherwise, Chancellor. If even half of what we've learned is true, she could be the most powerful weapon in human history." Cross was silent for a long moment. She had fought the Terran Alliance for 20 years, and in that time, she had learned to respect her enemies. They were bureaucratic and slow, hampered by democratic processes and ethical concerns that the Confederacy did not share. But they were also resourceful and determined, and they had an annoying tendency to survive situations that should have destroyed them. Project Emergence was exactly the kind of desperate gamble the Alliance would make. They were losing the war, slowly but surely, ground down by the Confederacy's superior numbers and industrial capacity. In 5 years, perhaps 10, they would be forced to surrender or face extinction unless they found a way to change the equation. A single weapon capable of turning the tide. "We cannot allow this," Chancellor Cross said finally. "If the Alliance controls a psychic weapon of this magnitude, everything we've built will be at risk. We need to either capture the girl or destroy her. Failure is not an option." General Wu nodded grimly. I'll assemble a strike force immediately. We can reach Kepler 7 inches 3 weeks if we push the engines. Make it 2, the Chancellor ordered. And General, I want her alive if possible. A weapon that powerful could be useful to our cause as well. As her general hurried to obey, Chancellor Cross turned back to the holographic map. Somewhere out there, on a station that was little more than a dot on her display, a 17-year-old girl was waking up to a universe that wanted to use her, control her, or destroy her. Cross had risen from nothing to rule an empire. She understood what it meant to be underestimated, to be dismissed, to be treated as a tool by those who thought themselves superior. She wondered if Mira Vance would prove to be as formidable as the Alliance hoped, or if she would be something else entirely, something no one was prepared for. Back on Kepler 7, Mira was having a dream. In the dream, she was standing on the surface of a world she did not recognize. The sky above her was filled with stars, more stars than she had ever seen, and they were all singing to her in voices that were somehow familiar. She looked down at her hands and saw that they were glowing. The light came from within her, pouring out through her skin like water through a broken dam. It did not hurt, this light, but it was powerful. So powerful that she could feel it trying to escape, trying to reach out and touch everything around her. In the distance, she could see shapes moving. They were humanoid but not human, tall and slender and wrong in ways that made her mind refuse to focus on them properly. They were coming toward her, and she knew without knowing how she knew that they had been waiting for her for a very long time. Child of the sphere, they said, and their voices were the same as the singing stars. You have finally awakened. The universe has been waiting for you. Mira tried to speak, tried to ask what they meant, but no words came out. The light inside her was growing brighter, threatening to consume her completely. Do not be afraid, the shape said. You are exactly what you were meant to be. Born wrong by human standards, but perfect by ours. You have the power to reshape reality itself. The question is whether you will use that power for creation or destruction. The light reached a crescendo, and Mira screamed. She woke up in her bed, drenched in sweat. The sheets twisted around her legs like restraints. The room was dark, but she could see everything clearly, her enhanced senses piercing the shadows without effort. Her heart was pounding so hard that she could feel it in her throat. Just a dream, she told herself. Just a dream. But deep down, in a part of her mind that she was only beginning to understand, she knew that it was something more. The shapes in her dream had felt real in a way that nothing else had since she woke up. They had known her, had spoken to her like she was something important, something precious. They had called her a child of the sphere. Mira lay back on her pillow and stared at the ceiling. She was 17 years old, but she had only been awake for 8 days. She had no family, no friends, no understanding of the world that had created her and then frozen her in time. She was alone in a universe that seemed determined to either use her or fear her, but she was not helpless. That much she had learned in the storage bay when she saved Thomas from those men. She had power, real power, and it was growing stronger every day. The question was what she would do with it. In that moment, lying in the darkness of her sterile room, Mira made a promise to herself. She would not be a weapon for the Alliance or the Confederacy or anyone else. She would find her own path, make her own choices, become her own person. She did not know it yet, but that simple promise would change the course of human history, and possibly doom the galaxy in the process. The weeks that followed Mira's first display of power were filled with tests, training, and uncomfortable conversations. Dr. Chen insisted that she be treated with kindness and patience, but Admiral Corvin was not the only one who saw her as a potential weapon. The Alliance was losing the war, and desperate people did desperate things. Mira's abilities grew at a rate that surprised even those who had created her. She learned to control her telekinesis, moving objects with increasing precision and force. She learned to shield her mind from the constant pressure of other people's emotions, building walls inside herself that gave her peace for the first time since awakening. She learned to sense danger before it arrived, a tingling at the back of her skull that warned her of hostile intent. But there were other abilities, darker ones, that she kept hidden from her handlers. She discovered that she could reach into people's minds and pull out their secrets like threads from a tapestry. She found that she could inflict pain with a thought, overwhelming the neural pathways of anyone foolish enough to threaten her. And in her darkest moments, she felt something stirring deep within her, a power so vast and terrible that even she was afraid to look at it directly. Thomas recovered from his injuries and returned to his duties, though he was no longer assigned to Mira's care. She saw him sometimes in the corridors, and they would exchange small smiles that meant more than either of them could say. He was the first person who had treated her like a human being, and she would never forget that kindness. 1 month after her awakening, Mira was summoned to Admiral Corvin's office for what he called a strategic briefing. She walked through the station's gleaming corridors with a security escort that kept a respectful distance, their weapons visible but not threatening. She could feel their fear like heat from a fire, and she had learned to ignore it. The Admiral was waiting for her behind his desk, a holographic display floating in the air between them. It showed a map of the galaxy, vast and beautiful and dotted with the red and blue markers of war. "Sit down, Mira," he said, gesturing to a chair across from him. His voice was calm, but she could sense the tension beneath it. "We need to talk about your future." Mira sat, folding her hands in her lap. She had learned to present a calm exterior even when her mind was churning with questions and fears. "I know what you want," she said quietly. "You want me to fight for the Alliance, to be your weapon against the Confederacy." Admiral Corvin nodded slowly. "I won't insult you by pretending otherwise. The war is going badly, Mira. We've lost 12 major systems in the last year alone. Our fleets are stretched thin, our resources are running low, and the Confederacy shows no signs of slowing down. We need an advantage, something that can turn the tide. And you think I can be that advantage? I think you could be much more than that," the Admiral said, leaning forward. "I've read the reports from your training sessions. Your telekinetic strength is already greater than any psychic in human history. Your precognitive abilities make you nearly impossible to surprise or ambush. And there are hints, indications, that you possess capabilities we haven't even begun to measure." Mira was silent for a long moment. She looked at the holographic map, at the billions of lives represented by those colored dots, at the vast emptiness between the stars where humanity struggled and fought and died. "What if I refuse?" she asked finally. "What if I don't want to be a weapon?" Admiral Corvin's expression did not change, but she felt something shift in his emotions. There was regret there, genuine regret, buried beneath layers of duty and determination. "Then we will do our best to protect you anyway," he said. "You are a citizen of the Alliance, Mira, regardless of the circumstances of your birth. We do not force our people into military service, even in times of war. But the Confederacy knows about you now. Those agents you stopped last month managed to transmit a partial report before you neutralized them. Chancellor Cross will not rest until she either captures you or confirms your death. You can hide, and we will help you hide, if that's what you choose. But hiding will only delay the inevitable. Sooner or later, they will find you." Mira closed her eyes. She could feel the weight of the Admiral's words pressing down on her, could sense the truth in what he was saying. She was not safe here or anywhere. Her very existence was a threat to the delicate balance of power in the galaxy. "I need time," she said. "Time to think, to understand what I am and what I can do. I won't make a decision about fighting until I know myself better." Admiral Corvin nodded. "That's fair. I'll give you as much time as I can, Mira. But understand that time is a luxury we may not have. The Confederacy is mobilizing a strike force. Our intelligence suggests they'll reach this sector in less than 2 weeks." After the meeting, Mira returned to her quarters and sat on her bed in the darkness. Her mind was racing with questions that had no answers, fears that had no comfort. She thought about Thomas, about Dr. Chen, about all the people on this station who had shown her kindness despite their fear. She thought about the soldiers dying on distant battlefields, the civilians caught in the crossfire of a war they never wanted. And she thought about the dream, about the strange shapes that had called her a child of the sphere. They had said she had the power to reshape reality itself, the power to create or destroy, but they had not told her how to use that power or what the consequences might be. She was still sitting there when the first explosion rocked the station. The attack came without warning, faster than anyone had anticipated. Confederacy strike ships had used a new kind of drive technology to cut their travel time in half, arriving at Kepler 7 12 days ahead of schedule. Admiral Corvin's intelligence had been good, But the enemy had been better. Mira felt the deaths before she heard the alarms. Each one was a small flame being extinguished, a voice going silent in the symphony of emotions that surrounded her. She rose from her bed and moved toward the door, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and something else. Something that felt almost like anticipation. The corridors were filled with chaos. Crew members ran in every direction, some heading for battle stations, others for evacuation pods. The station's defensive systems were firing continuously, and the vibrations of their discharge ran through the walls like thunder. Dr. Chen found her near the medical bay, her silver hair disheveled and her face pale with terror. "Mira, you have to get to the escape pods," she said, grabbing her arm. "They're here for you. If they capture you, everything we've worked for will be lost." "I'm not running," Mira said, and her voice was calm in a way that surprised even her. "There are people dying, Dr. Chen, people who have been kind to me, who have treated me like a person instead of an experiment. I won't abandon them. Mira, please. You don't understand what the Confederacy will do to you. They'll take you apart, piece by piece, trying to figure out how you work. They'll use you to kill millions of people. You can't let that happen." Mira looked into Dr. Chen's eyes and saw the genuine love there, the desperate desire to protect her. It warmed something inside her that had been cold for a very long time. "I understand," she said gently. "But I can't be protected forever. Sooner or later, I have to decide who I am and what I'm willing to do. I'd rather make that choice now, on my own terms, than have it made for me by circumstances." Before Dr. Chen could respond, another explosion shook the station. This one was closer, and through the windows, Mira could see a section of the outer hull tearing away into space. Air rushed past her as emergency bulkheads slammed shut, sealing off the damaged sections. She could feel them now, the enemy soldiers boarding the station. Their minds were sharp and focused, professional in a way that told her they were elite troops, the best the Confederacy had to offer. They were cutting through the station's defenses with brutal efficiency, heading straight for her location. "Get everyone you can to the escape pods," Mira told Dr. Chen. "I'll buy you time." "Mira, no, you're not ready for this. You've had barely a month of training." Mira smiled, and for a moment, she looked older than her 17 years, older than the few weeks she had been conscious. "I was born ready," she said. "I just didn't know it until now." She turned and walked toward the approaching danger, leaving Dr. Chen standing alone in the corridor. The emergency lights painted everything in red, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for her as she passed. She could hear gunfire now, the screams of the wounded and dying, the cold voices of Confederacy soldiers calling out targets. The first squad of enemy troops rounded the corner ahead of her and stopped short. There were 6 of them, armored in the black and silver of Confederacy Special Forces, weapons raised and ready. They had been expecting resistance, but not like this. Not a single girl in a simple medical gown, standing barefoot in the middle of the corridor. "Target acquired," the squad leader said into his communicator. "Moving to secure." Mira raised her hand, palm outward, and pushed. The telekinetic wave hit the squad like a wall of invisible force. Bodies flew backward, crashing against bulkheads and spinning through the air like leaves in a storm. Weapons were torn from hands and crushed into useless metal. In the span of 2 heartbeats, 6 highly trained soldiers were reduced to unconscious heaps of armor and flesh. More were coming. She could feel them converging on her position from multiple directions. Dozens of minds focused on a single purpose. They had been told that she was dangerous, but they had not truly believed it. Now they would learn. Mira walked forward, and the station seemed to reshape itself around her. Bulkhead doors that should have been sealed opened at her approach. Damaged sections stabilized as she passed, held together by the force of her will. The air itself seemed to thicken, becoming a shield that deflected enemy fire before it could reach her. She found a group of station crew trapped in a collapsed section of the habitation ring. They were scared and injured, certain that they were about to die. Mira reached out with her mind and lifted the debris away, creating a path to safety. "Go," she told them. "The escape pods on level 7 are still operational. Hurry." They stared at her with wide eyes. These men and women who had watched her from a distance, who had whispered about the weapon sleeping in the medical bay. Now they saw something else, not a weapon, but a protector, Not a danger, but a hope. Thank you. One of them whispered as she passed. Mira did not respond. There was no time for words, no time for anything but action. The main boarding action was centered on the command deck, where Admiral Corvin was coordinating the station's defense. Mira made her way there through corridors filled with bodies, both Alliance and Confederacy. The violence of the fighting was overwhelming, a constant assault on her enhanced senses that threatened to drown her in sensation. But she pushed through it, pushed past the pain and the fear and the terrible weight of all those dying minds. She had made her choice, and she would see it through. The doors to the command deck had been breached. Enemy soldiers were pouring through, engaging the security forces in close combat. Admiral Corvin was behind a makeshift barricade, a sidearm in his hand, firing at targets with the precision of long experience. Mira entered the chaos like a storm. She did not think about what she was doing, did not plan or calculate. She simply acted, her body and mind moving in perfect harmony, responding to threats before they fully materialized. Soldiers flew through the air, their weapons disintegrating in their hands. Grenades exploded harmlessly in mid-flight, their shrapnel caught by invisible walls. Energy bolts curved away from their targets, redirected by forces that defied conventional physics. In less than a minute, it was over. The command deck was silent, except for the groans of wounded soldiers and the distant sound of alarms. Admiral Corvin emerged from behind his barricade, staring at Mira with an expression she could not read. "The station's evacuation is 70% complete," he said, his voice steady despite everything he had just witnessed. "Another 15 minutes and we can begin the self-destruct sequence." "No," Mira said. "This station is too important. It's a research facility, a hospital, a home for hundreds of people. We're not going to destroy it." "Mira? The Confederacy has 3 cruisers and a carrier in orbit. We can't fight them off with what we have left." "You can't," she agreed, "but maybe I can." She walked to the main viewport and looked out at the enemy fleet. The ships hung in space like predators circling wounded prey, their weapons tracking the station's remaining defenses. They were waiting for the boarding action to succeed, for the all-clear signal that would tell them their prize was secure. They were not prepared for what happened next. Mira closed her eyes and reached out with her mind. This was different from anything she had done before, different from moving objects or reading emotions or blocking attacks. This was something new, something that came from the deepest part of herself, from the place where the sphere's power had been woven into her very being. She could feel the ships out there, could sense the thousands of minds aboard them, the intricate systems that kept them alive. And beyond that, she could feel something else, something vast and ancient and patient. The fabric of space itself, the underlying structure of reality that most people never knew existed. She took hold of that fabric and pulled. On the bridge of the Confederacy carrier Retribution, Captain Wei Zhang watched his tactical display with growing confusion. The sensors were showing strange readings, fluctuations in the space around Station Kepler 7 that should not have been possible. "What's happening out there?" he demanded. His sensor officer shook her head, eyes wide. "I don't know, sir. It's like space is folding in on itself. The gravitational readings are off the charts." The view screen flickered, and then they all saw it. A wave of distortion spreading outward from the station, bending light and matter and energy into impossible shapes. It washed over the nearest cruiser, and the ship simply stopped moving, frozen in place like an insect in amber. "All ships, full reverse," Captain Zhang shouted, but it was too late. The wave reached them before they could react, and suddenly the Retribution's engines were straining against nothing, their thrust neutralized by forces that the ship's computers could not even measure. One by one, the Confederacy ships went dark. Their weapons powered down, their shields collapsed, their engines fell silent. They were not destroyed, not even damaged in any conventional sense. They were simply switched off, rendered helpless by a power that made their most advanced technology look like children's toys. On Station Kepler 7, Mira opened her eyes. She was sweating, her breath coming in ragged gasps, but she was still standing. The effort had cost her more than she wanted to admit, but it had worked. "The enemy fleet is disabled," she said quietly. "They won't be able to move or shoot for at least 12 hours. That should give us time to evacuate the wounded and call for reinforcements." Admiral Corvin was staring at her like he was seeing her for the first time. And perhaps he was, perhaps they all were. The weapon they had created, the tool they had hoped to use, had just demonstrated that she was so much more than they had ever imagined. "What are you?" he whispered. Mira considered the question for a long moment. She thought about the sphere and the strange shapes from her dreams, about the power that flowed through her like blood through veins. She thought about all the things she could do and all the things she was afraid to try. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "But I'm starting to find out." The aftermath of the battle brought new challenges. The Alliance High Command wanted Mira transferred to a secure facility deep in the core systems, where she could be protected and studied and prepared for the next engagement. Admiral Corvin argued for keeping her at Kepler 7, where Dr. Chen's team could continue their work in a familiar environment. Mira herself had other ideas. "I need to go back to where it started," she told them in a meeting 2 days after the attack. "The sphere, the structure in the Perseus arm. That's where the answers are. That's where I'll find out what I really am." "Out of the question," the Admiral said firmly. "That region is contested space. The Confederacy has heavy patrols throughout the entire sector." "I know," Mira replied. "That's why I'm going alone." The argument that followed lasted for hours. Dr. Chen pleaded with her to reconsider, pointing out that she had barely begun to understand her abilities, that rushing into danger would only get her killed. Admiral Corvin took a different approach, threatening to have her confined for her own protection. But in the end, they both knew they could not stop her. Mira had demonstrated her power during the battle, and that power was growing every day. If she chose to leave, there was nothing on the station that could prevent her. "At least take a ship with a proper crew," Dr. Chen begged. "You don't have to face this alone." Mira shook her head. "A ship would be detected. A crew would be at risk. I can travel in ways that don't require conventional transportation. I can be there and back before the Confederacy knows I've left." "How?" Admiral Corvin demanded. "How can you possibly travel across light years without a ship?" Mira hesitated. This was the part she had not wanted to explain, the part that frightened even her. "During the battle, when I disabled the enemy fleet, I touched something. A kind of energy that exists beneath normal space, connecting everything to everything else. I think I can use it to move instantly from one place to another, like stepping through a door." The room was silent. What Mira was describing was impossible by any known law of physics. Faster than light travel required specialized drives and massive amounts of energy. The idea that a single person could simply teleport across interstellar distances was absurd. But so was everything else about Mira Vance. "I'll be careful," she promised. "I'll observe from a distance, gather what information I can, and return before anyone knows I'm gone. But I have to do this. I have to understand where I came from if I'm ever going to understand what I'm supposed to do." She left that night, slipping out of the station through an airlock that opened at her command. The cold of space did not touch her, her body wrapped in a cocoon of protective energy that kept her alive against the vacuum. She looked back at Kepler 7, at the station that had been her first home, and felt a strange mixture of gratitude and sorrow. Then she closed her eyes, reached for the fabric of space, and stepped through. The journey took no time at all from her perspective. One moment she was floating near Kepler 7, and the next she was somewhere else entirely. A region of space so empty that even the stars seemed dim and distant. And before her, vast beyond comprehension, was the structure. It was exactly as the records had described it. A hole in reality. A place where the normal rules did not apply. But what the records had not captured, could not capture, was the feeling of the thing. It radiated power like a sun radiated light. A constant pulse of energy that resonated with something deep inside Mira's chest. She approached slowly, carefully, reaching out with her senses to probe the structure's secrets, and as she drew closer, she began to hear voices, the same voices from her dreams, singing in frequencies that no normal human could perceive. "Welcome home, child of the sphere," they said. "We have been waiting for you." Mira took a deep breath, steadied her nerves, and flew into the unknown. Inside the structure, reality was different. Space had no meaning here. Distance was arbitrary, and time seemed to flow in multiple directions at once. Mira found herself in a place that was simultaneously infinite and enclosed, ancient and new, familiar and utterly alien. The voices were clearer here, and she could finally see their source. They were beings of pure energy, vast intelligences that existed outside the normal boundaries of the universe. They had no physical form that she could comprehend, but they projected images into her mind, images of themselves as they had once been, long ago when the universe was young. "We are the architects," they told her. "We built the foundations of reality itself. We created the stars and the worlds and the laws that govern all things. And then we transcended, leaving behind only echoes of our existence." "The sphere," Mira said. "It came from you?" "The sphere is a seed," the architects explained. "We planted many such seeds throughout the cosmos, hoping that one day a species would arise capable of nurturing them. Your kind found one of our seeds and used it to create you. You are the result, a bridge between what was and what could be." Mira tried to understand what they were telling her, but it was difficult. Her human mind was not designed to grasp concepts on this scale, to comprehend beings who had existed before the first stars ignited. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked. "Everyone wants to use me, to turn me into a weapon, but I don't want to destroy. I don't want to kill." The architects were silent for a long moment, and Mira had the sense that they were debating among themselves, considering her question from perspectives she could not imagine. "The choice is yours," they said finally. "Our seeds carry the potential for creation or destruction, for salvation or annihilation. We could not predict which path the bearers would choose. We could only hope. But what about the war? What about all the people dying? While I try to figure out my purpose, the conflicts of your species are your own to resolve. We have watched countless civilizations rise and fall, wage war and make peace. We do not intervene in such matters. But know this, child of the sphere. The power you carry is not meant for war. It is meant for something far greater." "What?" "Evolution," the architects said, and their voices seemed to shake the very foundations of the structure around her. "You have the ability to elevate your entire species, to guide them to a new stage of existence. But such elevation cannot be forced. It must be chosen, freely and willingly, by those who are ready for it." Mira felt the weight of their words settling over her like a heavy cloak. They were offering her something incredible, a purpose beyond anything she had imagined. But they were also warning her of the dangers, the risks of trying to change humanity before it was ready. "The war will end eventually," the architects continued, "as all wars end. But what comes after will depend on the choices you make. Will you be a weapon, destroying your enemies until no one remains to oppose you? Or will you be a beacon, showing your people a path to something better?" "I want to be a beacon," Mira said, "but I don't know how. I don't know how to save everyone without fighting." "Then learn," the architect said. "Learn who you are and what you can do. Learn the limits of your power and the possibilities of your compassion. We will be watching, child of the sphere. We will be hoping." The structure began to fade around her, the architect's presence withdrawing like a tide going out. Mira felt herself being pulled back toward normal space, toward the universe she had left behind. "Wait," she called out. "How do I find you again? How do I learn what I need to know?" "Look inside yourself," came the fading answer. "Everything you need is already there. We planted it in the seed, and the seed planted it in you. Trust yourself, Mira Vance. Trust the power you were born with." And then she was alone, floating in the darkness between stars, more confused and more determined than she had ever been in her short, strange life. She stayed there for a long time, thinking about everything the architects had told her. They had given her hope, a vision of a future where her power could be used for something greater than war. But they had also left her with more questions than answers. How was she supposed to end a conflict that had been raging for decades? How was she supposed to change the minds of billions of people who saw her as either a savior or a threat? How was she supposed to be a beacon when she barely understood herself? The journey back to Kepler 7 felt longer than the journey out, perhaps because she had so much to think about. When she finally materialized near the station, she found a small fleet of Alliance ships waiting for her, their weapons powered but not targeted. Admiral Corvin's voice came through her communications implant, tight with controlled anger. "Mira, you've been gone for 3 days. We thought you were dead or captured. There's a lot of explaining to do." 3 days. It had felt like hours to her, but time apparently flowed differently in the structure. She would have to remember that. "I know," she said. "I'm coming in, and I have news." News that could change everything. She flew toward the station, toward the people who were waiting for her with fear and hope in equal measure. She did not know yet how she would explain what she had learned or how she would convince them to believe her, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. The war was going to end, one way or another, and when it did, she would be ready. Whatever that meant. The debriefing lasted 18 hours. Mira sat in a conference room surrounded by admirals, scientists, politicians, and intelligence officers, answering the same questions over and over again. They wanted to know about the structure, about the architects, about every word that had been spoken and every sensation she had felt. Some of them believed her. Most did not. "You're asking us to accept that ancient godlike beings created the universe, and then left behind seeds that can transform humans into something more," said Senator Margaret Cole, the Alliance representative to the Military Council. "Forgive me if I find this difficult to accept." Mira understood her skepticism. A month ago, she would have found it equally difficult to believe, but she had been inside the structure, had felt the architect's presence, had looked upon something that predated the stars themselves. "I'm not asking you to accept anything," she replied calmly. "I'm telling you what I experienced. What you do with that information is your choice." "The immediate concern," Admiral Corvin interjected, "is the Confederacy. Chancellor Cross has publicly declared you a weapon of mass destruction and demanded your surrender. She's threatening to escalate the war to total annihilation if we don't comply. And your response? The official position is that you're a citizen of the Alliance and entitled to all the protections thereof. We won't hand you over." Mira nodded slowly. She had expected this, had known that her return would only intensify the conflict. The Confederacy feared her power, and fear made people do terrible things. "What if I went to her?" she asked. "Not as a prisoner, but as an envoy. What if I tried to negotiate an end to the war?" The room erupted in protests. Admiral Corvin's face turned red with anger, and even Dr. Chen, who had been silent throughout the proceedings, looked horrified. "You would be walking into a trap," the Admiral said through clenched teeth. "Cross would never honor any agreement with you. She'd capture you, study you, and use you to crush us." "Maybe," Mira agreed. "But what's the alternative? More fighting? More dying? More children growing up in a galaxy torn apart by war?" The architect said I could be a beacon. "Maybe this is how it starts." Senator Cole leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "You're proposing to negotiate with the enemy on behalf of the entire Alliance. You're 17 years old and have been conscious for less than 2 months. What makes you qualified to represent us?" It was a fair question, and Mira considered it carefully before answering. "I'm not qualified," she admitted. "I don't understand politics or diplomacy or the complicated history of this conflict. But I understand power, Senator. I understand what it can do and what it costs. And I understand that if someone doesn't try to break this cycle of violence, it will continue until there's nothing left to fight over." The debate continued for hours more, but in the end, they could not stop her. Mira had made her decision, and short of physically restraining her, an impossibility given her abilities, they had no way to prevent her from acting on it. Admiral Corvin pulled her aside after the meeting, his face drawn with worry and fatigue. "I've spent 40 years fighting this war," he said quietly. "I've seen good people die for causes they believed in, seen families torn apart by hatred and fear. I've always told myself that it was necessary, that we were protecting something worth protecting. And now I don't know anymore. I look at you, and I see something I never expected to see. Hope, maybe, or something like it." He paused, struggling with emotions he had spent decades suppressing. "Be careful, Mira. Chancellor Cross is not evil, but she is ruthless. She will do whatever she believes is necessary to protect her people, and she believes you are a threat to everything she's built." "I know," Mira said, "but I have to try." The journey to New Geneva took 2 weeks by conventional transport. Mira could have traveled there instantly using her connection to the underlying fabric of space. But she chose the slower route deliberately. She wanted time to think, to prepare, to understand the people she was going to face. The ship assigned to her was a diplomatic courier called the Olive Branch, crewed by volunteers who had accepted the risk of carrying the galaxy's most wanted woman into enemy territory. Captain Yuki Tanaka, a woman of Japanese descent with kind eyes and steady hands, became something like a friend during the long journey. My grandmother was alive during the First Colonial War. Captain Tanaka told her one evening as they shared tea in the ship's small galley. She used to tell me stories about what it was like before, when humans were united in their exploration of the stars. She believed we could find that unity again. Do you believe that? Mira asked. I believe that anything is possible if people are willing to work for it. The question is whether enough people are willing. Mira thought about those words often during the remainder of the journey. The architects had told her that evolution could not be forced, that it had to be chosen freely by those who were ready. But how could she convince people to choose peace when they had known nothing but war for 3 generations? The Olive Branch was intercepted by Confederacy patrol ships 2 days before reaching New Geneva. Mira felt the moment when their weapons locked onto the hull, felt the fear of the crew as they waited to see if they would live or die. Confederacy vessel to Alliance courier, came the cold voice over the communications channel. You are in restricted space. Prepare to be boarded. This is Captain Tanaka of the Olive Branch. We are here under diplomatic immunity, carrying an envoy to meet with Chancellor Cross. There was a long pause. Then, what envoy? Mira moved to the communications console and spoke clearly into the microphone. My name is Mira Vance. I believe the Chancellor is expecting me. The patrol ships escorted them the rest of the way, weapons still trained on their hull. When they reached New Geneva, Mira saw a world that took her breath away. It was beautiful, perhaps the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. A planet of blue oceans and green continents, and cities that sparkled like jewels in the sunlight. This was what they were fighting over, she realized. Not territory or resources or ideology, but the right to build something beautiful, something lasting. Both sides wanted to create a future worth living in, and they were destroying each other in the process. Chancellor Cross received her in the Great Hall of the Planetary Palace, a chamber of such grandeur that Mira felt small despite her vast power. The Chancellor was exactly as the intelligence files had described her, elegant and cold and possessed of an intelligence that seemed to see through everything and everyone. So you're the weapon that has caused so much trouble, Cross said, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. I expected something more impressive. I'm not a weapon, Mira replied. I'm a person. I've come to talk about ending the war. The Chancellor's laugh was like the tinkling of crystal glasses. The Alliance sends a child to negotiate on their behalf. Either they are more desperate than I thought, or this is some kind of trick. No trick. The Alliance leadership opposed this mission. I came on my own. Cross studied her for a long moment, and Mira felt the woman's mind probing at the edges of her consciousness, looking for deception. She let down her shields just enough to allow the Chancellor to see her sincerity, her genuine desire for peace. Interesting, Cross murmured. You actually believe what you're saying. How refreshing. Chancellor, the war has been going on for 30 years. Millions of people have died. Whole worlds have been devastated. And for what? Both sides claim to be fighting for humanity's future. But if the fighting continues, there won't be much of humanity left. Pretty words from a girl who could end the war herself if she chose to. With your power, you could destroy our fleets, level our cities, force us to surrender. Why haven't you? Mira thought about the question carefully before answering. It was the heart of everything. The reason she had come here instead of doing exactly what the Chancellor described. Because force doesn't create peace. It creates submission, resentment, and eventually more war. I could crush the Confederacy, but I could never make you accept the Alliance as your equals. I could conquer you, but I could never make you free. And freedom, I'm beginning to understand, is the only thing worth fighting for. Chancellor Cross was silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, there was something different in her voice. Something that might have been respect. You sound like someone I knew once, someone I cared about, before the war took her from me. She shook her head, dismissing the memory. I built the Confederacy from nothing, Miss Vance. I united 1,000 worlds under a single banner, gave them purpose and direction and hope. I will not let it be destroyed. Not by the Alliance, and not by you. I'm not asking you to destroy anything. I'm asking you to consider a different path, one where both sides can survive and eventually thrive. And what would this path look like? Mira took a deep breath. This was the moment she had been preparing for, the proposal she had been refining in her mind throughout the long journey. A ceasefire, to begin immediately. Both sides withdraw to their pre-war borders. All prisoners are exchanged. Then, we establish neutral zones, places where people from both sides can meet, trade, share ideas without fear of attack. Over time, as trust builds, we expand these zones. Eventually, maybe generations from now, our descendants find a way to truly reunite. That's very optimistic, Cross said dryly. And what guarantee do I have that the Alliance won't use the ceasefire to rebuild their forces and attack when they're ready? Me, Mira said simply. I'll serve as the guarantee. If either side violates the peace, I'll act against them. Not with destruction, but with prevention. I'll make it impossible for anyone to restart the war. The Chancellor's eyes widened slightly. You would turn against your own people? If they break the peace, yes, and I would turn against yours under the same circumstances. I'm not loyal to the Alliance or the Confederacy, Chancellor. I'm loyal to humanity, all of humanity. What followed was 3 days of intense negotiation, the most exhausting days of Mira's short life. Chancellor Cross was a formidable opponent, testing every aspect of the proposed agreement, looking for weaknesses and hidden advantages. But she was also, Mira slowly came to realize, genuinely tired of war. She had built the Confederacy to give her people a better life, and the endless conflict was slowly destroying that dream. In the end, they reached a preliminary agreement. It was not perfect, and there were many details left to be worked out. But it was a beginning, a foundation that could be built upon. The news of the ceasefire spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Some celebrated, finally daring to hope for an end to the nightmare that had consumed their lives. Others protested, claiming that their leaders had betrayed them, that the enemy could not be trusted. Hardliners on both sides spoke of treachery and weakness, demanding that the fighting resume. Mira returned to Alliance space to help implement the agreement, traveling between worlds and speaking to crowds that numbered in the millions. She told them about the architects, about the potential for humanity to become something greater, about the future that awaited them if they could find the courage to reach for it. Not everyone believed her. Many saw her as a freak, a dangerous mutation that should have been destroyed at birth. Others worshipped her as a savior, a prophet sent to lead humanity to salvation. Both extremes made her uncomfortable. I'm not a god, she told Dr. Chen during one of their increasingly rare meetings. I'm not even particularly wise. I'm just a girl with too much power and no idea what to do with it. That might be exactly what we need, Doctor, Chen replied with a small smile. Someone who questions themselves, who doubts their own judgment. The truly dangerous leaders are the ones who never question anything. The peace held for 6 months, longer than anyone had expected. The neutral zones became places of genuine exchange, where scientists and artists and ordinary citizens from both sides could meet and discover that their supposed enemies were simply people. Trade routes reopened, families separated by the war were reunited. And for the first time in decades, children grew up without the constant fear of death from the sky. But not everyone was satisfied with peace. On the anniversary of the ceasefire, a group calling themselves the True Humanity Front launched a coordinated attack on the neutral zones. They were extremists from both sides who had joined together in their hatred of Mira and everything she represented. They believed that humanity's destiny was conflict, that struggle and war were necessary for the species to remain strong. The attacks killed thousands and threatened to reignite the war. Leaders on both sides called for retaliation, for blood to pay for blood. The fragile peace was crumbling, and Mira stood at the center of the chaos, trying desperately to hold everything together. You promised to prevent this, Chancellor Cross accused her during an emergency communication. You said you would guarantee the peace. I said I would act against anyone who violated it, Mira corrected grimly. And I will. But I cannot be everywhere at once, cannot prevent every act of violence before it happens. I can only respond to threats, not eliminate them entirely. Then respond, destroy these terrorists before they destroy everything we've built. Mira closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. She could do what Cross demanded. She could reach out with her power and snuff out the True Humanity Front like candles in a hurricane. It would be easy, so easy, and it would end the immediate threat. But it would also prove the extremists right. It would show that peace could only be maintained through violence, that her power was ultimately just another weapon of destruction. It would set a precedent that would haunt humanity for generations. No, she said finally. I won't destroy them. I'll find them and stop them. But I won't kill them. Every death adds to the cycle of violence. I won't contribute to that cycle anymore. The hunt for the true humanity front took weeks. Mira tracked them across the galaxy, following traces of their communications, the echoes of their hatred in the minds of their supporters. She found them in hidden bases on asteroids and abandoned colonies, groups of angry, frightened people who had convinced themselves that she was the enemy of all they held dear. When she confronted them, she did not attack. Instead, she talked. She listened to their fears and their grievances, acknowledged the pain that had driven them to violence. Some of them she was able to reach, convincing them to lay down their weapons and accept the possibility of peace. Others were too far gone, too consumed by hatred to hear reason. For those, she used her power not to kill but to contain. She created prisons without walls, zones of suppression where their weapons would not function and their communications could not reach the outside world. They could live there, isolated but alive, unable to harm anyone, until they chose to change. It was not a perfect solution. Many criticized her for showing mercy to terrorists, for refusing to deliver the justice they demanded. But it was her solution, the one she could live with. The peace survived, barely, and with scars that would take generations to heal, but it survived. 5 years after the ceasefire, Mira stood on the surface of Earth itself, the birthplace of humanity that neither side had claimed during the war. The planet was slowly recovering from the ecological damage of centuries past, its oceans cleaning themselves, its forests spreading across lands that had been barren for generations. She was not alone. Beside her stood representatives from both the Alliance and the Confederacy, gathered for the signing of a formal treaty that would officially end the state of war that had defined their civilizations for so long. Chancellor Cross was there, older now and somehow softer, the sharp edges of her personality worn smooth by years of building rather than destroying. Admiral Corvin was there too, retired from military service and working to help former soldiers find new purposes in peacetime. And Thomas was there, the young nurse who had been the first person to treat her with simple human kindness. They had stayed in touch over the years, their friendship deepening into something more precious and more complicated. He understood her in ways that others could not, saw her not as a savior or a weapon but as a person trying her best in impossible circumstances. "Are you ready?" he asked softly as the ceremony was about to begin. Mira looked out at the crowd, at the thousands of people who had come to witness this moment of history. She could feel their emotions washing over her. Hope and fear and joy and sorrow all mixed together in a complicated tapestry of human experience. "I don't think anyone is ever ready for something like this," she admitted. "But we do it anyway. That's what it means to be human." The treaty was signed with great ceremony, holographic projections broadcasting the event to every world in settled space. Leaders who had spent their lives fighting each other shook hands and spoke words of reconciliation that would have been unthinkable just a few years before. When it was Mira's turn to speak, she found that all the speeches she had prepared seemed inadequate. So instead, she simply told the truth. "When I woke up 5 years ago, I was afraid. Afraid of what I was. Afraid of what people expected me to be. Afraid of a universe that seemed determined to use me or destroy me. I was told that I was a weapon, born to fight and kill in a war I had never asked for. And for a while, I believed it. But then I met people who showed me another way. People who saw me not as a weapon but as a person, who treated me with kindness even when they were afraid. They taught me that the circumstances of our birth do not determine who we become. We make that choice ourselves, every day, through every action we take. I was born wrong, by the standards of normal humanity. I was created through technology that violated nature itself, given power that no single person should ever possess. And yet here I am, standing before you, proof that even the strangest among us can find a place in this universe. The war is over. The killing has stopped. But our work is just beginning. We have been divided for so long that we have forgotten what it means to be united. We have focused on our differences until we could no longer see our similarities. We have let fear and hatred drive us when we should have been guided by hope and love. I am not asking you to forget the past. The wounds are too deep for that, and forgetting would dishonor those we have lost. But I am asking you to look toward the future, to see the possibilities that lie before us if we can find the courage to reach for them. The architects who created me spoke of evolution, of humanity taking its next great step forward. They said that step could not be forced, that it had to be chosen freely by those who were ready. I believe we are ready. I believe that the same spirit that drove us to the stars, that refused to accept the limits of our birth, can drive us to become something greater than we ever imagined. Not gods, not angels, just people, working together, learning together, growing together. That is the future I choose. That is the future I hope you will choose too. The applause was thunderous, washing over her like a wave. But Mira barely heard it. She was looking past the crowd, past the cameras and the dignitaries and the historical significance of the moment. She was looking at the stars. In the years that followed, humanity changed. Not overnight, not in any dramatic transformation, but slowly and steadily, like a river wearing away stone. The barriers between the former enemies dissolved as people traveled freely between what had been hostile territories. Cultural exchange programs brought artists and scientists together, producing collaborations that neither side could have achieved alone. Children grew up learning the history of the war not as participants but as students, able to see both sides with the clarity that only distance provides. Mira watched it all with a mixture of pride and humility. She had played a role, certainly, but she knew that the real heroes were the ordinary people who chose peace day after day, who rejected the easy path of hatred and took the harder road of understanding. Her own powers continued to grow, evolving in ways that even she could not predict. She learned to heal as well as harm, to create as well as destroy. She discovered that the sphere's energy was not just a weapon but a tool for transformation, capable of elevating consciousness and expanding awareness. Some people came to her seeking enlightenment, and she did her best to share what she had learned. Others came seeking power, wanting her to grant them abilities like her own. These she turned away, knowing that power without wisdom was more dangerous than no power at all. The architects remained silent, but she could feel them watching from their dimension beyond dimensions. She understood now that her creation had been a test, not just for her but for all of humanity. Could the species that had produced so much violence also produce someone capable of transcending it? Could the children of Earth learn to lay down their weapons and take up something better? The answer, it seemed, was yes. 20 years after her awakening, Mira returned to the structure in the Perseus arm. She was older now, her face marked by the lines of experience and her mind enriched by decades of learning. Thomas came with her, his hair gray but his eyes still bright with the curiosity that had first drawn her to him. The architects were waiting for her inside, their presence stronger than she remembered. "You have done well, child of the sphere," they said. "Better than we dared to hope." "It wasn't just me," Mira replied. "It was never just me. I was just the catalyst. The choice was always humanity's to make." "That is true wisdom," the architects acknowledged. "The understanding that no single being, however powerful, can change the course of a species. Real change must come from within, chosen freely by those who are ready to embrace it." "What happens now?" Thomas asked, and Mira was proud that he could perceive the architects clearly, evidence of how much his consciousness had expanded through his years at her side. "Now we offer you a new choice," the architects said. "Humanity has passed the first test. You have proven that you can overcome your instinct for destruction and choose a path of creation instead. But there are more tests ahead, more challenges that will determine your ultimate destiny." "What kind of challenges?" "The universe is vast, and humanity is not alone in it. Other species have found our seeds, have been transformed by their power. Some have become beacons of light, spreading wisdom and peace wherever they go. Others have become something darker, threats to all life that exists within their reach." Mira felt a chill despite herself. She had always known, on some level, that humanity could not be unique. The mathematics of the cosmos demanded that other intelligent species existed somewhere among the trillions of stars. "You want us to face them," she said. "These other transformed beings. In time, yes, but not yet. You are still young, still learning what you can become. For now, we ask only that you continue on the path you have begun, that you guide your people toward the light when they falter, and step back when they are ready to lead themselves. And if we fail, if we make the wrong choices..." The architects were silent for a long moment, and when they spoke again, there was something almost like sadness in their ancient voices. then you will join the countless others who have failed before you, civilizations that rose to great heights only to fall into darkness. We do not intervene in such matters. We can only plant seeds and hope. Mira and Thomas returned to human space with much to think about. They told the story of their journey to those who would listen, adding to the growing body of knowledge about the architects and their purpose. Not everyone believed them, but enough did to ensure that the truth would survive. The galaxy continued to change. New discoveries pushed the boundaries of science and philosophy. Old hatreds faded as generations passed and new ones were born. The scars of the war remained, but they were healing, becoming part of a shared history rather than a source of ongoing division. Mira watched it all with eyes that saw further than any human before her. She watched children play in parks on worlds that had been battlefields. She watched scientists unlock secrets that had puzzled humanity for millennia. She watched artists create beauty that brought tears to her eyes and joy to her heart. And sometimes, in quiet moments when she was alone with her thoughts, she felt the presence of the architects watching from beyond the boundaries of normal space. They had planted a seed in humanity, and that seed was growing, reaching toward the light, becoming something that even they could not fully predict. Born wrong by the standards of her species, Mira had become something new, something that defied classification. She was not a weapon, though she had the power to destroy worlds. She was not a god, though she could do things that seemed miraculous. She was simply a person, flawed and uncertain and constantly struggling to do the right thing in circumstances that had no clear answers. And that, perhaps, was exactly what humanity needed. Not a perfect savior who would solve all their problems for them, but a flawed example who showed them that anyone, even someone born under the strangest and most difficult circumstances, could choose to be a force for good in the universe. The story of Mira Vance spread across the stars, told in 1,000 languages on 1,000 worlds. It became legend, then myth, then something that transcended both. Generations yet unborn would grow up hearing about the girl who was born wrong but refused to accept the limitations that others placed on her. They would hear about the battles she fought and the peace she helped to build. They would hear about the architects and the seeds and the vast destiny that awaited humanity among the stars. And they would look up at the night sky with wonder in their eyes, knowing that somewhere out there, an ancient and vast intelligence was watching, waiting to see what choices they would make. The galaxy had been on the brink of destruction, and one girl's acceptance of her own power had saved it. But the story did not end there. It continued with every child who chose kindness over cruelty, every leader who chose diplomacy over war, every ordinary person who found the courage to reach out to someone different and say, "I understand." That was the true legacy of Mira Vance. Not her power, not her abilities, not even the peace she helped to create. Her legacy was the simple truth she had discovered and shared with the universe. We are not defined by how we are born. We are defined by what we choose to become. And if we choose wisely, if we find the courage to embrace our potential rather than our fears, there is no limit to what we can achieve. The stars themselves are waiting for us. All we have to do is reach for them, far away, in a dimension beyond normal perception. The architects observed the progress of their most successful seed with something that might have been called satisfaction. Humanity was evolving, growing, becoming more than the violent children who had first crawled into space centuries ago. There would be challenges ahead, of course. The dark civilizations lurking at the edges of the galaxy would eventually make their presence known. The tests would become harder, the choices more difficult. Some would fall, some would fail, and some would rise to heights that even the architects could not foresee. But that was the nature of evolution. It was not a destination but a journey, endless and ever-changing, filled with possibilities beyond counting. Mira Vance had taken the first step on that journey. She had shown her people what they could become if they chose light over darkness, love over fear, hope over despair. She had been the catalyst for a transformation that would echo through the ages, and somewhere, in the quiet places of her mind where she was still the frightened girl who had woken up in a cold medical bay with no memory of who she was, she smiled. She had been born wrong by every standard that existed, but she had become something boundless, something beautiful, something human.